Thank you, Shobhakar. I thank all the speakers for their contributions to the session, and I now move on to the panel discussion. May I invite the panelists to join me? We have a rich and diverse expertise on the panel for a discussion on what the contours of a resilient global future could possibly be and how one could reach there. We have three panelists: Johan Rockström, who is the director of the Stockholm Resilience Center and a professor in environmental sciences at Stockholm University. We have Alexandra Gavilano from the University of Bern, Switzerland, coming from the Environmental Policy Analysis Division. And we have Luis Fernandez-Carril from the Climate Change Research Program at UNAM, Mexico. To begin with, I would request the panelists to share their thoughts on what the contours of a resilient global future could look like in about 3 minutes each, and then we will take it from there. May I first invite Johan, followed by Alexandra and Luis, to share their thoughts on this.
I think it's been clear from the science that has been presented this morning and yesterday that we can conclude something quite dramatic as a scientific community, that we as humanity are now in a position to disrupt the stability of the entire Earth system. And that this requires, which has been pointed out by Ban Ki-moon, it's been pointed out by Yim Yong Kim of the World Bank, by Angel Gurria at the OECD, even by Christine Lagarde of IMF, that we need a new relationship between people and planet. And that is all about the contours for a new resilient future. And to summarize, in my mind, the three fundamental scientific insights that leads to this dramatic conclusion of a complete new relationship and therefore a complete transition into a new logic where we need to develop as humanity within a safe operating space on a stable and resilient planet are the following. The first is clearly that we have the scientific evidence that we've entered the Anthropocene. We're now the largest force of change at the planetary scale. The second is what RICARDO summarized so eloquently earlier, that the response when we're punching the planet is not linear, it's not incremental, it's therefore not predictable. The universal response is really surprise. Tipping elements is a real risk and therefore also something that we need to relate to by creating the redundancy and buffering capacity to avoid ending up in the way we've basically designed our entire economic and governance logic, optimization and efficiency, when in fact we need to have redundancy and flexibility and diversity, the way we define resilience. The third and most humbling insight, though, is in my mind that we have so much data today to say that we can define the desired state of the planet for our prosperous future. We know that the Holocene, the remarkable, not to say the almost miraculously stable equilibrium of planet Earth for the last 12,000 years has enabled humanity to prosper into the modern world we know it. Pope Francis writes about this in a very eloquent way, aligning itself with science, talking about the need to now safeguard creation, in our words, basically a resilient Earth system. The 2 degrees target, in fact, is a climate guardrail to preserve a Holocene-like state of the planet. And I think that Corinne, in a very nice way, summarized the fact that the way the Earth system is responding so far to our energy imbalance or abuse is actually to apply all its biogeophysical processes to remain in the Holocene. Earth system is our best friend, applying its processes to remain stable. And if you add these 3 things up, the Anthropocene, tipping elements, and the Holocene, that leads, in my mind, to 2 conclusions. One is that we now need to address Earth resilience. We need to govern and manage and innovate for Earth resilience. And that leads, however you twist and turn things, to the need to define a safe operating space. And we've define that or call that framework planetary boundaries. Ségolène Royal, in her speech yesterday, actually equated that in a very nice way to the need for us to become planetary stewards. And it is all fundamentally about maintaining the negative feedbacks, the flexibility, and the ability of the Earth system to actually dampen and continue to be stable at planet Earth. So if planetary boundaries becomes a defining framework for a safe future for humanity, I'd just like to emphasize, which just complements what other scientists have said already, it means that it's not enough just to focus on reducing emission of greenhouse gases. It really means an integrated approach where we manage social, ecological systems in a way that continues to allow not only for carbon sinks, but for the flexibility to adapt and transform. And one way to define this in a very technical way is that, if you look at every IPCC assessments in 1990, the uncertainty range with regards to climate sensitivity has remained remarkably stable between 2 and 4.5 degrees Celsius at a doubling of greenhouse gases. Many accuse this to be science is still uncertain. I would strongly criticize that conclusion. It is rather a range representing risk, as Corinne and Karen pointed out, but it's also a range of resilience, because the range between 2 and 4.5 is really determined by our ability to become stewards or to be stewards of the systems that can allow us to avoid the feedbacks that take us to 4.5 degrees. So I think we should use the uncertainty range as we learn more and more of how the complex Earth system operates as a communicative language of saying this is really resilience at play. Avoiding 4.5 degrees is not uncertainty, it is about resilience. Choosing a sustainable path is about resilience. And just to close then, the policy domain is understanding this. Ban Ki-moon is actually launching a global resilience initiative at the climate COP to be able to represent this. Thank you.
Resilience has become a core concept now as a tool for analysis and also in the development agenda. But most importantly, it has now become a sort of paradigm in political practice. And this is the part that is becoming more interesting and dangerous also. In political practice, we see resilience that is being used as something desirable, something good, something normative in itself, something we strive for. But actually, and we have to remember that we want to avoid this, actually. And now, to explain this and to allow me to elaborate, 30 years ago, well, almost 30 years ago, with the Brundtland Commission, issued our common future, and they coined the term sustainable development, which was defined as the development that does not compromise the needs of the present generation or the future. If this is true, then sustainable development is no longer possible. Now we're endangering this generation and the next generation. Furthermore, 5 years after the Brundtland Commission issued the report, the Framework Convention was created, and as you know, the objective of the convention was to avoid dangerous interference with the climate system. Now, we are here in this conference called Our Common Future, and now we added 3 important words: under climate change. Are we normalizing this change in political practice? We have seen how there is a shift in policy, in politics, to normalize, to become operative as people will need to become resilient as something good. And actually, this is not something we desire. We desire that the governments of the world do something about this, and soon, because time is running out. So if we allow resilience to become the paradigm in political practice, we're normalizing, we're welcoming the new normal. And as a recent declaration of the Southern Pacific Islands issued a couple of weeks ago, we refuse, quoting, we refuse the new normal. We don't want a resilient global future. What we want is to avoid it. It is not something to be desired. So in political terms, aside from perhaps to use resilience as a analysis, system analysis, in political practice, we don't want, in the present moment, and preparing for COP21, we don't want resilience, we want resistance to climate change.
Well, I strongly agree with that, and I think that's one of the biggest problems. I always considered the description of contours of resilience of our common global future as a justification of still having the problems of finding solutions to act now. Well, thinking of what does it actually mean, and I'm quite happy that you as well as other speakers already have highlighted this, is what do we mean with a resilient global future? And I also strongly agree and derive from this description that we actually want for all livings and all ecosystems as we have them now to be able to survive and also exist in the future. But do we actually really enforce this kind of thinking also from the scientific community? Are we actually sure that something will happen December this year also with all the inputs that we are giving? Fact is that science is only accountable towards the scientific truth. We're not directly elected by politicians, we're not directly elected by society. So we mostly keep on giving inputs to decision makers. From my view, and after having heard these two inputs, I strongly try to enforce the scientific community to go one step forward and give more than just scientific inputs, but actually recognize our position we have got and acknowledge the power the scientific community has got from also the political view. Being working in environmental politics now, I see the struggle of implementing new scientific insights that we get, and it's quite a lot that comes daily from all over the world. So we maybe just have to start to take more action as well, not as activists, but by supporting the movements that we see in society, that we see in political dynamics worldwide. Should it be a fossil-free university that we just can support by being a professor, by being a researcher? Could it be that a conference like this one, with the topic of climate change, should have no meat on the menu? Or should we use the plastic bottles for the entire week? These are things and pledges we can already have now. And I think as a young and ongoing researcher, I think this is the first step we have to also share with the entire world. So we all know that other social problems like wars and disequalities because of propositions and ideas of different lifestyles will go on. About climate change, we have solutions, we have ideas. So we should give more impact to the decision makers to really take action now. It still will have other problems that we don't know how we will combat them, like micropollutants, like GMOs. So why should we not take more action and go beyond just giving input? I thank you very much for this.
Thank you. Thank you. Very interesting views. We've heard earlier today, most of the speakers agree that individuals and countries working together can bring about desired change, whether that be through a resistance approach, a resilience approach, or in terms of who we are accountable to and how, and what actions we take. I would like to now request each of our panelists to, I only have 2 minutes to give to each of you, but to, in those 2 minutes, respond to each other, give comments on the views you've heard from each other, focusing particularly on what could be actionable points for getting to a resilient future.
Yeah, let me start by saying that I agree with you, Luis, that there is, and I would really emphasize this, a wrong interpretation of what resilience is. Resilience has become some kind of inflated buzzword. Sustainable development is always good. Resilience is certainly not always good. The Mugabe regime in Zimbabwe is very resilient indeed, and you need to break resilience many times to transform in a desired direction. I also really want to emphasize that what you're criticizing, in my mind, is really adaptation, saying that we have, unavoidable climate change, our only path is adaptation. Resilience, as I tried to emphasize, is about, number one, persisting, resisting, managing planet Earth in a way that we keep the Earth system in its Holocene equilibrium, which actually means staying way below 2 degrees Celsius, as showed by RICARDO. But it also includes the capacity to be adaptive under changing conditions. So it's certainly not a sort of say a give-up strategy. So I think it's important to stay to the scientific definition of resilience. Then I think a bit inspired from the way this discussion goes, I find it very interesting to see that the social dimension of resilience, the human dimension of resilience, is, I think, the big opportunity at this stage. We're starting to see a change of atmosphere when it comes to the discussion on climate change. Climate change is now much more a question of opportunity. There's more evidence that we can actually, in a transition to a decarbonized future, have healthier, democratic, more technical, cooler, more effectively poverty alleviated, more resilient societies, and that's a more desirable future. And that we're starting to see a large enough minority in the world, particularly young people, rising to this opportunity. And that, to me, is social resilience at play. The People's Climate March last year is one such attribute. So one shouldn't only emphasize on the physical side of this, as Karen pointed out, the social dimensions of resilience and what can tip the world in the right direction is really exciting as well.
Well, as I said before, the thing is that there is a definition for resilience as a system tool, as a system analysis tool, but in political practice, that it doesn't matter at all. In political practice, in discursive practice, resilience becomes a term that it may be used for many different purposes. It may be used for to describe a feel-good situation. For example, when the typhoon hit the Philippines, they were saying, I remember an interview with a photographer that said, oh, now everything is destroyed, but they still smile. They are very resilient. Now, about the same event, the typhoon, the government of the US said, we know the Philippines has a history of being resilient, for example, in the Second World War, so now we urge the Philippines to become more resilient. And we can think, well, what does the President of the United States want to say with that? And after that, the USAID started a resilience program in the Philippines with Procter & Gamble and Coca-Cola. So, and there are pictures, you can see the photographs, of people who were severely damaged by the typhoon with a Coca-Cola in their hands and the products of Procter & Gamble on the other. And the representative of this company is saying, resilience development here, we can see it. So what is resilience? Is it to sell products? Is it to have a feel-good attitude towards a negative disaster? Or what else can it mean? And that is exactly the problem, that we cannot clearly define the concept. Perhaps in science we can, but not as a political practice. And that is precisely the danger, because it can be used as an excuse for ideological use, for neoliberal use. So that is where we have to pay attention who is talking about resilience. The World Bank, the IMF, etc. How are they using the term?
Well, I think that's quite important as well, as you see, and of course, as also it has happened with the term sustainability, it will be used in other forms. What is especially important is when it comes to decision-making or in the COP conference, that the term is being explained by those who give the inputs, by the scientists that are present, and by the policymakers. So what is the aim of being resilient? What is what we all need for us? I think there is where we start in general. So I agree with that it will be malused also in the future, but that what we actually want and what stands behind it is to be able to go on. So we can recognize that in different sectors as well, as you have mentioned. I think in general, I also strongly agree that the different aspects and tipping points that we are going to reach soon from now will have a great impact on the entire resilience. We will be confronted with new challenges that will make it very hard for us all to even think about what is resilience for ourselves, for our own personality, and how do we want to live. And will we be resilient to also in developed countries leave things behind that we're now used to? And this will be part of the resilience and of the combat of the entire globe, I guess.
Thank you very much. I think that's been a very interesting discussion. Final big hand to all our speakers. It's been a very interesting session, and thank you all for your contributions. I now hand over to Dr. Susanna for announcements.
Thank you all. Just a few housekeeping announcements. We are a bit late with the plenary, but now we have a coffee break until 11:30. We will then have the large parallel sessions, and they will be in the same rooms as yesterday. So this room, room 1, on the same floor, room 2, also room 4 in the mezzanine, room 11 and 12 at the basement level. And then we will have the lunch break with the poster view. This will be until 2:30. And please make sure you buy your metro tickets in advance, because yesterday we had some queue for buying metro tickets. And be aware that the next parallel sessions will take place both at UNESCO and at UPMC, starting at 3 p.m. at the university. And I also have an announcement. We will contact you by email to make sure that we can post the slides on the website of the conference. I would also mention that for one session, which is 4418B, Information for Decision Making, this session is taking place from 3 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. at UPMC. So please check the program on the website, which is more up-to-date than the program which is printed